Okay, Vars isn't that bad. I actually like his content. I just think he doesn't look into the way too dank workings of the game. As for Vars, he gets 2 weeks in prison, but this can be shortened down to a week if he acts like a good boy.
I wasn't sure whether she would be a support or damage dealer, but I believe in every Hyperboom team featuring her, she's the one dealing the damage most of the time. Back to Farazan though, kind of like how Mika didn't do all that much to improve Eula's standing in the ranks, she didn't do very much for Xiao.
This can be shortened down to a week if he acts like a good boy. Get back here, Vars! Vars! You cannot escape me. I'll chase you to the ends of the earth. Hello there, Flip here, and we are back with another Genshin court. As you should have seen from the intro and the title, we are serving out allegations to that man Vars again. This one honestly hits the deepest because this fraudulent fiend lied. He released a community post saying, "I'm going to change. I'm going to coerce with TCs to make my content as accurate as possible."
So that was a fucking lie.
And we thought that was it. That should have been the end of the story arc. But he spun back, and he has been on some nefarious timings with some of his most recent takes that I just can't let slide anymore. And I think it's gotten to the point where you can honestly make the case for Vars being the biggest threat in the Genshin community right now, even more so than Sekka. And one of the biggest examples of this is going to be a worse blunder than Tenten saying Nahida's burst applies Dendro, which we'll see in the first piece of evidence being the top 5 DPS characters in Genshin.
I believe in the first video, I even mentioned it's highly probable that the video will be outdated because of 3.0.
The video was outdated on release, let's be completely honest.
Having established that, one final thing I want to clarify is, while I will mention the specific teams or formations of the 5 characters in question, this will ultimately focus on their own personal capabilities. In other words, they may be the best damage dealers in the game, but their teams may not necessarily be the best teams overall.
I've listened to this like 100 times and I still don't get what he means, mostly due to the fact that it is a contradiction with some later placements. And then he also talks and harps on the character's supportive capabilities for some reason. So what are you even really evaluating?
The hallmark of Hu Tao to this day is her ease of use. With how complex some characters' abilities are getting, her simplicity in rotation and combos can be refreshing for players who want to just autopilot through the game.
I'm holding myself back so much because there's a later piece of evidence where I can talk more about this.
The only real downside to her is that she doesn't have 100% uptime like some other characters. Guide to Afterlife has a 9-second duration and 16-second cooldown, so you'll have to figure out something else in the interim.
Are we in 1.0? Have we not yet caught up to the fact that characters don't need to be on field for a ridiculous amount of time? Most buffs don't even go past 10 seconds, and most characters that could have 100% field time usually don't, because there's no point in doing so as unbuffed damage isn't hitting that hard.
Next up we have a new member, Yelan. She can deal insane amounts of damage on her own, but being a Hydra unit and sub DPS, it makes her an easy fit into virtually any team composition where you would need Hydra application. And not only that, but she has arguably one of the best passive talents in the game, providing a gradual steady increase in damage from 1% at the start of its duration to 50% at the end.
Okay, this is why the structure of the video inherently makes no sense, because I agree with calling Yelan an off-field damage dealer more so than she is a support, I guess. But then why go on so extensively about her supportive capabilities, because in that case we should bring in characters like Kaza and Jingcho, who also do around the same damage share as Yelan, Jingcho in single target and Kaza in AoE of course, while also having good supportive capabilities. If we go by this standard which you have given Yelan, Hu Tao should not touch this list at all. She would be on the bench for the all-star roster. Also, that's another thing, depending on scenarios, the character strong in AoE and ST are vastly different, which is very relevant. So how is that evaluated? The structure of a top 5 that is very vague with not many standards set just leaves it all over the place.
Hu Tao Yelan can somewhat alleviate her consistency issues via constellations. C1 can boost her DPS and energy regeneration, while C2 puts her Hydra application on a comparable level to Xingqiu, dealing 4 total attacks per wave instead of 3.
So, constellations are evaluated too? That also changes things very drastically.
Another new addition to the list is Nilu, a character who at first came off as a gimmicky rogue strategy, but is now one of the strongest damage dealers the game has ever seen.
What? Nilo gets like -1% of the bloom ownership on her teams. She just enables the cores mostly and adds some of her scaling to them. This is the equivalent of saying Shenhe's the damage dealer on an Ayaka team. Nilo is literally an ascension passive to the bloom reaction.
This damage amp is beyond insane, and the fact that everyone on her team can spawn Battlefield cores makes it surprisingly consistent as well, contributing to her 5-star rating in both DPS and burst.
So, what is this video about? The first thing said was that this was mostly about individual performance and teams don't matter that much, but now Nilou is getting additional points for the consistency of almost all party members being able to trigger cores. Make it make sense.
No, but seriously, Nahida is an easy choice to make.
I guess this isn't horrible considering Constellation like C2 and her damage being okay in like 3+ target scenarios. I make risky bets all the time, so I will let you cook.
I wasn't sure whether she would be a support or damage dealer, but I believe in every Hyper Bloom team featuring her, she's the one dealing the damage most of the time.
There is no way you even play this game. I really hope he was not saying that Nahida is who the fuck is calling me? I really hope he was not saying that Nahida is triggering Hyper Blooms, but the fact that he specifically singled out that team instead of, you know, the entirety of Dendro as a whole, I genuinely think he believes that Nahida is a Hyper Bloom trigger.
Last but not least, we have Raiden Shogun.
Ease of use, difficult. How is Hu Tao easy and Raiden difficult?
This is partly the reason behind my rating her consistency and ease of use the way I did. Objectively, it's not that difficult to stack up her resolve and whatnot, but compared to the other 4 characters, Shogun requires a bit more execution and timing on your rotations.
I'm not even lost for words at this point, there is just none to describe what I think. Raiden is a difficult character to use because you have to build up resolve, which is done by pressing your other character's elemental skills before you go to her, like every other on-field character in the game. But Hu Tao is easy, right?
As the obvious downside with her hyper carry variant is that she has a painfully long cooldown of 18 seconds in between bursts. So if she has to fight waves of enemies or fails to execute all targets during those 7 seconds, you have to find something else to do.
I know this is really nerd, but it's not exactly 7 seconds. Due to hit lag, it ends up totaling to be around 8 to 9 seconds usually. Also, her downtime is counted the moment you click her burst, so she only has around 10 seconds of downtime, which isn't that much considering you have 3 other characters on the team that you need to swap to.
Alright, there you have it, the 5 strongest damage dealers in Genshin Impact as of version 3.7.
The 5 strongest damage dealers in Genshin, in which 2 out of 5 barely hold the right to be called a damage dealer, and with the remaining 3, 2 of them you talked more about the supportive capabilities more than the damage contributions on a team. Wonderful list. That will wrap up this piece of evidence. 10 years. Straight up. Vars has to be playing the game through an AFK livestream at this point, I refuse to believe otherwise. And the research he did in this video had to be looking at the Genshin wiki of their talent descriptions and the Genshin.gg tier list. I'm actually curious now, what does Genshin GG have Nilo listed as? Even Genshin.gg knows Nilo is a support. But yeah, the biggest problem here is Vars' framing. His production quality is ridiculously good on top of the fact that he uses really abstract words a lot, which makes him come off as he really knows what he's talking about. The people searching up the top 5 damage dealers are obviously going to be newer players, and gravitating towards this may also lead them to Vars' other videos in which it's not like he frames his takes as inaccurate or not researched, so people may inherently use his talking points as guides, which can be misleading. One of the biggest criticisms I faced in my first court about Vars is that he's mostly talking about game design, and coming from that lens. And I think it is fair, but that shouldn't absolve him of some of his not too knowledgeable takes, even if it's from a non-meta lens. If I was making a lore video on the reasons why humans decided to fuck the Adepti and randomly blurted out something like, Yanfei's dad was stronger than Ganyu's dad, and that is also why Yanfei does more damage than Ganyu in combat, that's still ultimately talking about the meta, and therefore it's fair to trial them on that. And even from a game design standpoint, I don't think Vars knows that much about it either, which we'll talk about in the next piece of evidence, being his why everyone plays on Hu Tao.
Even though Genshin is one of the rare few gachas that doesn't fall victim to power creep to the same extent as others, it's had its fair share of units who were once good, but have lost representation due to more convenient or efficient options being made available. Some of the game's earlier meta units like Diluc, Mona, Xiao, and even Ganyu have seen better days.
Diluc was always worse than Zhangling, we just didn't realize it yet at the time. Mona was arguably worse on her release because Ganyu and Diona didn't exist. She's always had her issues that people have highlighted. Xiao was one of the best damage dealers back then, and even now he can compete with the C6 Farazan. And yeah, Ganyu is fair.
She consistently boasts very high usage from overworld exploration to Spiral Abyss for casual and hardcore players and whatnot.
I can get usage rates as you can actually look at them, but how do you prove overworld usage? That is pure headcanon.
Long-awaited Ayaka was finally released, the next big dumb damage character. Shogun, incredible, but more of a team player instead of big dumb damage. Ito, the dumbest of big damage.
I lose 3 years off my lifespan every time he says big dumb damage. If you want to show Hu Tao is this uncontested character, please come up with better terms.
Miko, team player damage.
What does team player damage even mean? A new term gets invented every minute but is never explained, and you just have to grasp at straws.
Every big dumb damage unit that succeeded Hu Tao gradually veered away from personal damage and more towards reaction pressure. Technically speaking, Ayaka, Shogun, Ayato, I'll hate them, and so on and so forth were considered on-field attackers, but you'd be hard-pressed to say they have the same exact purpose as Hu Tao.
Again, what does that mean? Hu Tao is as reliant on elemental reactions as all those characters you just mentioned. Hu Tao is quite literally Vaporize. Her entire kit identity is tied to Vaporize. Almost all the damage she deals is based on Vaporize. In what world is she not also as based on reaction pressure as the other characters there?
In an age where every top meta team requires proper understanding of reaction chaining, swapping, crowd control, ability timings, etc., Hu Tao is a very relaxing pick when you want to turn your brain off and just attack anything that moves. All you had to do was buffer up with Xingqiu and you were basically good to go. I wouldn't say she's the easiest character to play though, what with the animation cancelling for max DPS and all, but she was the definition of Unga Bunga. Xiao would be the first melee-centric main damage dealer, but even he would be an acquired taste as his gimmick was based on punching attacks, another somewhat unexplored awkward playstyle that wasn't everyone's cup of tea.
This is a massive contradiction considering Xiao is a much simpler and easy character to pick up than Hu Tao. Hu Tao has 2 combos, well, actually 6 because there are 2 more variants of her N1C and N2C. Hu Tao can either cancel her combos with a jump or dash cancel, or just not cancel them at all. And guess what? All of them have drawbacks. Not cancelling Hu Tao at C0 is a 5 to 10 damage loss on top of the fact that you will fly past enemies, having to waste stamina to reposition, or you just end up missing Yulon or Xingqiu's burst procs, neutering your damage and Hydra application. At C0 you should be jump cancelling. These don't have as massive of a drawback other than feeling horrible and stiff as you have no mobility in the air. And at C1 you should be dash cancelling, but the problem with dash cancelling is that if you try to spam CAs, you just end up hitting the dash cooldown, in which the only solution is to weave in N2Cs or just do N2Cs altogether, which are more mechanically challenging as they require more actions. This isn't even taking into account that other Hu Tao teams prefer a certain combo. N1C applies less pyro, so for teams with lower Hydra application like solo Yulon, it's preferred. Additionally, in AoE situations, you should be doing delayed cancels on Hu Tao, so she can pass through more enemies. And I haven't even touched on hit lag extension, which extends her skill uptime, or the PP slide mechanic. And yes, you can say that you can just ignore it, but that applies to almost all characters that he called complicated. Just because a character's kit is detailed doesn't mean they are any less or more complicated than others. Nahida has a Bible level kit description, but at the end of the day, it is always just marking enemies and do auto attacks if you're using her on field.
Anyways, I don't think there's anyone more straightforward in this game than Hu Tao, since every 5-star from version 2 onwards has ability descriptions longer than college dissertations.
If you think length equals complexity, you need to go back to doing college dissertation.
The pyro element as a whole has been losing market share in favor of reaction teams, but thanks to her absurdly high base numbers on top of a very fluid and uncomplicated playstyle, she practically stayed relevant through brute force.
This is what I meant by saying I don't think Vars understands Genshin's game design much either. Almost every pyro team is a reaction team. For every pyro damage dealer barring Klee and Toma for Burgeon, the strongest and hardest hitting parts of their kits can be vaporized consistently, and this is not coincidence. Even Yoimiya's normal attack string ICD lines up to vape her strongest hits. Pyro is supposed to take advantage of this and constantly vaporize for the essentially 50% damage boost, which is even more with EM. Hell, basically every single pyro damage dealer on vape teams is best built with EM. That is how relevant reactions are to their identity. Reactions are built and embedded into pyro as much as it is for every other element.
Guide to Afterlife's buff has a 9-second duration and 16-second cooldown. 9 seconds is a healthy amount of time for damage, and during the 7-second off time, that's when you can swap to other characters to refresh buffs. Other on-fielders either take too much field time or are active for too little.
Why were these the examples each show? Klee can have as much or as little field time as you want. She's one of the most flexible characters in terms of field time. And Yoimiya has a 1-second difference between Hu Tao, relax.
I suppose, for lack of a better analogy, Hu Tao is like the Charizard of Genshin Impact. Are there stronger Pokemon like Salamence, Metagross, and Tyranitar? For sure, but they're a pain in the ass to level up. Charizard is popular because he's reliable, relatively easy to get going, great stat line, and type coverage, just about everything you can expect from a DPS-oriented Pokemon.
Vars, you thought talking about Pokemon would make you safe, but it doesn't. Base Charizard is an absolutely horrible Pokemon both for competitive and for playthroughs. In competitive, there's a move called Stealth Rock which sets a layer of rocks that damages enemies when they switch in. Because Charizard is a fire and flying type, he actually takes 50% damage just from the rocks alone, and he doesn't have the bulk to survive even weaker hits from there. And if you use Heavy Duty Boots, which is an item to negate this damage, you lose better items to help his damage capability, which he needs as his base attack stats don't lean in any way, making it bad offensively. 100 base speed is also incredibly mediocre nowadays. And for playthroughs, you can't even get it in most games, and if you do, there are much better fire types in every region, including the starters that don't evolve ridiculously late. Charizard may be one of the poster Pokemon, but they are mid.
Stay. Hashtag deity gang.
This was the only valid point made in the video. So yeah, I think we can rightfully check off that Vars' knowledge on Genshin's game design isn't that great either. I didn't know Jaystone had this much competition when it came to white knighting Hu Tao. I don't think anything said was as despicable as that first piece of evidence, but I'll add on the punishment of having to play a C0 Hu Tao for the rest of your life. That will break any man. And this video is already getting way too long for my comfort. Let's move on to the last piece of evidence.
If memory serves, the only sources of plunging attack damage amplification come from Farazan, Albedo, Thoma, and Xunhe, heavily restricting who can directly augment Xiao's damage output.
Xiao actually wouldn't even care that much for plunging damage bonus. Most damage bonuses in Genshin are additive, not multiplicative. And Xiao through his burst, A1 and Goblet already gets a ridiculous amount of damage bonus to where attack buffs are generally better. So no, plunging attack buffs wouldn't really do that much for Xiao.
Even then, Xunhe is primarily meant to support cryo damage, not plunging attacks, while Thoma's shield lasts only 8 seconds, roughly half of Xiao's ult duration, thus rendering it too impractical.
I will say it once again, Vars does not know how to play the game. In Thoma's actual talent description, it mentions how the duration of his shield can be refreshed, and you also have things like his C2 to help with his uptime. Thoma's shield can reliably last the entire duration of Xiao's burst.
Back to Farazan though, kind of like how Mika didn't do all that much to improve Eula's standing in the ranks, she didn't do very much for Xiao.
Life sentence. Pack it up. Farazan for Xiao, especially at C6, quite literally solves all of Xiao's issues massively. She's enough to battery Xiao by herself while not being a mostly dead slot like Sucrose. Buffs Xiao for his entire ult duration. And Xiao also had a habit of knocking lighter enemies back, which with Farazan can also mitigate with her solid grouping. The only drawback is just that it is mostly tied to getting the C6, but saying that Farazan is comparable to Mika is an outlandish statement, and Vars also talks about constellations a lot in his videos, so it would be weird to just overlook Farazan for the sake of this argument.
Xiao went completely against the strengths of Animo and did his own thing, so whenever Animo got stronger, he wouldn't. For him to improve, they would have to cater specifically to Animo itself, but the whole theme of Animo is to help and assimilate other elements. Xunhe was a big boost to Ayaka because Cryo is already a very self-focused element. Meanwhile, Farazan did very little to incentivize players to use Xiao because 1. Animo itself is not suited for hypercarry teams.
Making this argument is just so weird considering both Xiao and Wander are basically the truest hypercarries in the game by nature of doing an overwhelming majority of the team's damage.
None of this is to imply that Xiao is a bad character. He's capable of dealing extreme amounts of damage, but with the caveat that you invest extreme amounts of time and money on him. Constellation 6 is pretty damn good, but the people who are insane enough to see 6 a 5-star are not the average player.
This is Luffy levels of reaching. Xiao is one of the most complete C0 characters. You could have talked about the fact that he gets a lot from having a 5-star weapon, or the nature of hypercarries needing higher artifact investment, but the hill you died on is that Xiao needs constellations.
Perspective of the average player, hence everyone. The average player will also not be aware of or care about hyper advanced tech like normal attack cancelling and whatnot. You can't argue X character is good if you do X, Y, and Z when only 1 out of every 1,000 or so players are willing to do X, Y, and Z. Of Hu Tao to this day is her ease of use. Her simplicity in rotation and combos can be refreshing for players who want to just autopilot through the game. I wouldn't say she's the easiest character to play though, what with the animation cancelling for max DPS and all. I know everyone's gonna go off in the comments about how she's mechanically difficult due to animation cancels, but personally I don't find it all that hard. Then again, I have Constellation 1 are not the average player, and my Why No / Why Everyone series comes from the perspective of the average player, hence everyone.
And that will be the final piece of evidence for today. The Why No One Plays series at this point in Genshin is honestly just extremely dated. 90% of characters have a decent enough niche to where they aren't unusable, mainly because of Dendro, to where most of the Genshin cast is reasonably balanced. So making a case for why no one plays them is extremely hard, and Vars doesn't really have that much of an understanding of Genshin's meta to make an accurate assumption of the reasons why. But enough of my voice. Life sentence, as I said, with no chance of parole. Court is now closed. I don't have that much closing thoughts, and I'm also trying to keep this video under 20 minutes. TLDR, Vars, good videos, bad takes. I'll see you on the flip side. Okay, thanks, bye. I love you.